Hi everyone, I'm here with Simon Brennan here today, who's the VP of Sales Europe at EngageHub. So Simon, thanks very much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Chris.
We're at the start of the new year, and I sort of promised myself I wasn't going to talk about COVID or the pandemic, because I think I spent like the last year talking about it. But it's going to be my first question, I suppose, which is, I suppose, what have you seen coming back into the new year, and how have you guys been sort of affected over the last sort of like couple of years in terms of like dynamics have changed and contact levels have changed and those kind of things?
Certainly initially at the start of the pandemic, what we saw with our customers, the fact that certainly for, the key sectors that were busy and didn't have to shut down, they were facing kind of phenomenal demand in terms of on contact from their own consumer base. And is really trying to find out a way to service that demand. It reached unprecedented levels. I know one of our clients had received, I think, from an inbound contact center perspective, they received 300% of the contact they would normally receive in a whole year. So it was really adjusting to that, accepting that actually they needed to do something about it, and then go about planning as to how they could do that and ensure that they were trying, still offering a service and an avenue for customers to get in touch.
Those initial peaks that we kind of saw, did they carry on all year? So it's sort of, I know we saw an initial peak when sort of like there was the initial lockdowns, but then did it go back to the previous levels, or always remained at this sort of higher level in terms of telephony, as an example?
Yeah, so the first few weeks were unprecedented levels. From our customers, it certainly maintained a much higher level than it would have in a normal year for a good period of time. I think in the past, sort of in 2021, certainly, it's probably gone more back to what might be termed the new normal, which seems to be a regular phrase these days, where it might be higher than pre-pandemic levels, but actually it's the new level that the contact's at these days, but certainly a lot less than at the start of the pandemic.
And do you think it sort of changed fundamentally? Has it changed like the nature of contact in terms of like how we interact with companies, do you think? I mean, have you been sort of seeing that? I mean, you guys look at multiple contact channels. I know it's not just telephony and it's SMS. You got and you can sort of orchestrate all of those. I mean, are you seeing like shifts and changes in mix at all?
I think in terms of inbound, the range of channels is much greater than it would have been in the past. I think some of that was happening anyway, but I think one of the big things of the pandemic is hastened quicker change than some organizations were expecting. I think it's proven that actually in the event of like a major issue or emergency, which it was in terms of customer contact for many, the ability to move and pivot much quicker. A lot of organizations could have done something in maybe 6 weeks. It typically would have taken 6 months if they needed to. Just going back to the question, certainly more channels are being used. I think for outbound contact, at least, the traditional channels from the past 5 or 10 years are still the most prominent, the likes of SMS, email, voice. I think inbound, obviously, chat has been increasing over the past few years anyway, irrespective of the pandemic, but certainly the availability of that for a lot more organizations seems to be a lot more prominent. But I think one of the biggest keys as well is that the need for automation in contact strategies and contact channels has been one of the key things that the pandemic's hastened, particularly with the unprecedented contact rates coming in that, whether everyone wants to be served by a chatbot as such, or whether they want to speak to a human, I think there's an acceptance that most people would rather have a level of engagement rather than being sat in a queue for an unlimited amount of time, potentially, with no contact. So then it's all about actually how can you try and remove potentially avoidable contact that could or should be self-served within like an automated contact channel.
So rather than being customer preference, it's actually that the actual customer preference isn't preference around the channel. It's around my preference is getting to my solution as quick as possible.
Absolutely. I mean, people still have their preferable channel, and certainly for outbound, that's probably more important. But the reality is, for a lot of organizations, certainly in the early days of the pandemic, the actual demand was outstripping the supply being of agents to actually take calls. What's the better case scenario? Sitting in a queue for a limitless period of time and meeting massive frustration while you're waiting to get through, or having a route or avenue to try and serve that channel. Obviously, within that, there's more intelligence needed in terms of, the ability to do things like deflect to a different digital channel that might be a quicker handling time for an agent or an initial response, or offering the option of a callback potentially at a pre-arranged time. So at least you could schedule in. But I think the key thing was, it was, offering consumers a route to try and fix whatever their problem was or their question was.
With the digital channels, it just seems like the whole thing's just been massively exploding in terms of like the variety of channels, right? So, you've got, WhatsApp's come on the scene, you've got the different types of messaging channels, you've got telephony, you've got email, you've got a lot of things. It just seems like it's exploding, I suppose. And part of the challenge seems to be like, how do you coordinate all of that?
Yeah, and I think that is one of the things that a lot of organisations are having challenges with. As you say, the breadth of channels it seems to extend almost every few months at the moment, and particularly with social and, as you say, the likes of WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, all these contact avenues that customers have got to reach the organisations. Then it's actually, how do you harness the data across the different channels to enable a connected conversation? And I know personally from EngageHub, one of the big things that we've found is actually our ability to connect across the different channels and offer a seamless experience has been key in us really having and delivering some great solutions since the start of the pandemic.
And is that like clients looking for that? I mean, has that become I know Omni-channel's been around for a while, and it's sort of like it's been gradually growing, but is that sort of turned a corner, do you think, in terms of like being a real sort of like drive? I mean, you've seen that from a lot of clients or in some of your conversations?
I think it's an aspirational drive in the respect, everyone would like to do it. A lot of organizations claim and think they're doing it. There's not that many sectors that are really doing it right and to the full ability, or at least a high degree of capability. But so aspirational, yes. Reality, probably less so. I mean, from a technology standpoint, the capabilities are certainly there. I know within our organization, we can mobilize those types of solutions. Part of the challenge is from the organization side, just how connected their own infrastructure, systems, processes are. You're still finding a lot of silos and legacy architecture that's providing significant challenges to kind of hit that utopia of offering true omni-channel and a totally seamless and connected experience for the consumer.
And what's the groundwork that the companies need to do you think, to get it ready?
I think one of the big things to start really is, assess exactly what they're looking to achieve. Are they offering a channel because it's cool, and are they offering it knowing how they're going to deliver it, provide it, use the data, and offer it as actually a channel that's going to be successful for them internally and their customer base. I think the next thing is looking at the breadth of channels they've got and how connected they are in respect of, and that connection, the most key component of that is data and how they orchestrate that data across the different channels for that connected experience. For example, there's a lot of organizations where a consumer may call them one day, not reach an agent, not have their inquiry serviced. The following day, they might have been on hold for a period of time or gone through an IVR with they've pressed a number of buttons, which is signifying their intention or what they're looking to do to a point at least. They might contact the following day on web chat and they're starting from scratch again. I think it's really, really important within the experience of the channels that actually if people are contacting, you're capturing what they're doing and understanding their customer journey to a point, so that when they come back, you can remove some of the requirements and some of the time it takes them to actually get to the point they were at previously.
Yeah, there's quite interesting questions around channel effectiveness, isn't there? So, for example, you send an SMS or you send a message, and as far as you're concerned, it doesn't result in an immediate callback, but it's been read. I mean, I might actually read a message, and it's triggering in the back of my mind that after the second one, after the third one, well, maybe then I go and do something, and it might even be a different channel, and sort of measuring that sort of like response rate becomes quite a tricky problem in terms of like what was effective, because often it's not immediate, is it? I mean, certainly in my mind it's not immediate.
I think some channels are more immediate than others. SMS would be a key one for that. It's that old thing that you're much likely to read an SMS before you're going to read an email, because the information tends to be much more concise and to the point exactly what it is, rather than email which might have more information. So it's really about what the message is, how much information needs to be in there. And sometimes an SMS actually is trying to point someone to more information, i.e. to go to an online servicing account or to almost prompt into an email where there's more information about whatever that communication is talking about. It's about using channels in the right way to try and engage with your audience, to get them to look at and open either an SMS or an email, or, you know, just to digest at least the core information and the call to action within there.
Having almost like a blended contact strategy across multiple channels and working out the effectiveness of it needs to be across all of the channels, because it's quite a simple solution just looking at just, you know, I send an SMS, they click the link and I know what the response rate is, versus I send multiple SMSs and, you know, have multiple different interactions, and how effective is that as a contact strategy versus another one? It becomes quite a complex problem. I mean, one of the challenges of omni-channel, I would think.
It does. That's where connecting the channels is absolutely essential. Ability to use multiple different channels and cascade through those channels, so that you don't send an SMS as an example and then once the campaign's gone, you stop and then you start a different channel. It's really, really important that campaigns have got multiple channels where you can cascade through them, but on a personalized basis. And what I mean by that is, you know, it's profiling which is the preferential channel for the consumer. It's giving them that choice or the ability to choose on the fly. And not being too rigid with it, in the respect that don't have a strategy where it might be send it email first, push notification second, SMS third, and then a voice call fourth. It's ability for enabling individuals within those different channels to choose which are their preferable options, because ultimately that'll lead to a much more effective campaign where you engage with them more readily.
And I suppose making sure that then the messaging is joined up all the way through that as well. So it's not like going back to like the first SMS message after you've had all of these other, WhatsApp messages that have gone through.
Yeah, I think continuity is key there. That there's a similar theme to the language and style of the language. I think one of the other things that does as well, that engenders trust, that actually the organisation contacting you across the different channels is who you think it is. Clearly, at the minute, well, not just at the minute. In reality, it's always been the case for years. But there's a lot of spoof and spam emails, and there's lots of contact and lots of schemes that are quite prominent in the news, where people are being scammed of money or information, data breaches. So I think, having that consistency within the messaging, the language, does actually give consumers confidence that the organisation contacting them is who they say they are, and they know it is because of the style and type of the message they're receiving.
And if it relates to a previous message, or like you're having a conversation, it's me because we had a previous conversation earlier, so we talk about some of the things we talked about, sort of thing.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
So I know you do stuff in not just in financial services, but you do stuff in multiple industries as well. I mean, do you see sort of like these contact strategies changing across different industries as you look across them, or what are the dynamics that kind of change?
Yeah, I think there's definitely different contact strategies across different industries. I think one of the biggest things within that is some industries are just much further forward and more advanced in terms of their technology internally. And really probably the way they've embraced digital and the different contact strategies. So if you think, you mentioned financial services, they would be much more advanced than some other sectors, the likes of the energy and utilities, logistics, potentially, where there's probably been a lot of mergers and acquisitions through the years. Actually, the infrastructure across the whole organization is very vast, and it's probably quite often quite disjointed, which does make things much more challenging. Whereas financial services, has been significant investment for much of the main high street banks. Of that has probably been driven from some of the pure e-commerce digital players, where they had to ensure that their digital offering is market leading, and is, if not exactly as good as some of the e-commerce players, because that's their whole business, certainly not far off that service and offering.
So is that an opportunity for some of the other players to almost like leapfrog and put technology in and leapfrog? I mean, how much of an opportunity do you think there is?
I think for sectors that are probably behind the eight ball in terms of their current omni-channel and digital offering, I think there's a significant opportunity for those organisations to really invest massively in the technology. And if you're looking in the retail world, I mean, some traditional bricks and mortar retailers do digital and omni-channel very, very well. There's others that, some of them have been very prominent ones that have struggled in recent years. Some of the likes of Arcadia, who've never actually invested enough in the digital offering, whereas those traditional bricks and mortars, and you see it particularly across the the main grocery providers, they've got a very strong offering that they're continuing to evolve over time. And you only look then on the flip side of your likes of ASOS and some of the Hut Group, some of the pure digital providers, and the successes and growth they've had through digital being at the forefront of everything they do and their whole communication strategy. So I think the bricks and mortar organizations that do invest in it and really take that as a lead, I think they're the ones that have managed really to move with the times, as opposed to some of the real massive names that have been casualties in recent years.
Where's the role for the human in the process, do you think? I mean, we talk a lot about digital, automation, those kind of things. I mean, what's the role for the human, at the company? I mean, like colleagues and those sorts of things. Where are we evolving to, do you think?
I think the role of the human, if you're looking from an inbound contact perspective, I think the importance of the human agent will start going more and more down the angle of, really dealing with much more complex inquiries, or dealing with like vulnerable customers, which obviously been a very kind of key customer profile since the start of the pandemic, and some of the challenges that's proving. It's the way you service vulnerable customers or priority customers that might be like a VIP high spender. I think the role of the human will focus on those types of customer types and inquiries ever more. There's still always a role, there's still always a percentage of the population that are going to want to speak to a human over an automated chat bot. But I think complex inquiries and vulnerable and priority customers will be where human agents kind of, not evolve, they still cover that, but that's going to be more of a focus than potential self-serve inquiries that have come in the past.
I suppose it's just trying to find where do they fit within that omni-channel mix, right? And to making sure it's most value add.
Exactly, and they are essential within that omni-channel mix, because I think you've seen it in the past where for many, many years, a lot of large enterprise organizations were offshoring their customer contact operations. And then in the past few years, there's been many more that have brought them back onshore. And that's clearly happened for a reason, because I think just in terms of the general press and media, there was quite a lot of bad publicity for some major enterprise organizations who had gone down a route of offshoring where the actual consumers just felt like there wasn't the care or attention of them, or that actually it was all about offering the service at the cheapest possible way, rather than offering a good service and actually caring about their customers and wanting to support them, what their inquiry or question was.
I suppose digital gives them a way of sort of doing some of that, and then using what is essentially much higher cost channels to then give where they got the value at, I suppose.
Absolutely, it certainly does.
So we talked about offshoring there. So I know you do work not just in the UK, you do work sort of internationally in other markets as well. So I'm quite interested to know what you see in terms of different dynamics in terms of contacts in different markets. So we were chatting a little bit earlier around voice messages as an example versus text and those kind of things. But what are the different dynamics you kind of also kind of see?
I think it's really, really important that you know and understand the markets you're operating in. That's easy for organizations who work in a single market. So they know the market because it's naturally, where their operations are. I think organizations who work in multiple markets, it's essential they're aware of market themes, trends, and the expectation of consumers within market. Not all countries will have inbound voice potentially as a primary contact channel, and the expectation of that. So I think it's important of knowing the different types. So we provide some operations through some of our global customers across like the likes of Asia and China, and China WeChat as a social media channel. It is massive there, so the need to have that as an offering within the contact strategy is essential. If you then take the likes of LATAM, WhatsApp voice messaging is much more prominent out there, and sending recorded voice messages via WhatsApp, where it may only be very small in the UK and certain parts of Europe. In other territories, it's a key channel. So it's essential really that you provide key channels by market that consumers are used to, familiar with, and ultimately want to use.
Yeah, the voice note's kind of interesting in terms of like, why is that different? And then if it becomes popular, then how do you do that from a customer point of view? So are you like leaving voicemails, almost like sending a voicemail out using WhatsApp? I mean, to get them to respond because that's the way they do it.
It really is about understanding. It goes back, I guess, whilst different territories and different markets have different preferable channels because it's they're more popular channels in their markets. It all fundamentally comes back to the same point. It's offering choice for customer contact for both inbound in terms of how they're going to get in touch with you and the way they do it, and a mix of kind of speaking, the ability to reach agents and use of automation to either offer self-serve or certainly in busy times, offering them a route to do something, at least service part of their inquiry. And then outbound, it's actually understanding, what is the channel of choice or what's the preference on an individual level, and actually trying to look at the individual and personalize that to enable that actually you're not dictating to the consumer how you want them to either get in touch with you or how you want them to engage with the message you've sent them. You're actually saying to them, we know that you like being contacted via this channel. You seem to relate to it and engage with it. So we'll go with what you want, not what we want you to do. That's where we're finding the most success, both in terms of customer satisfaction and consumer satisfaction, and in terms of success from engagement in general, whether that be from a promotional perspective and operational or actually, a customer contact.
And what's the best way of, I suppose, finding out what the preference is? Because obviously you've got behaviour, and you can ask them as well, but you've also got behaviour as well. I mean, what's your guidance around trying to work out what the preference is?
Yeah, well, data is key to that. So whereas some organizations have got extensive data that's very usable, where they've already done that profiling and they're aware of preferencing, and it's all about building it into a campaign strategy and ensuring that actually the technology can deliver that channel personalization in line with the data held. But where it's not held, which tends to be more of the case, certainly, especially for those sectors that are on the, much more of a formative stage of an omni-channel digital offering and journey, it's then important to actually start understanding. And it takes time. It doesn't happen immediately. It might be to start with. It is a more rigid approach. So if you're looking at an outbound campaign, it might be, we know that we've got 80% email addresses. We might only have 40% mobile numbers. So we'll go with a strategy that's maybe email, SMS, then voice in terms of the channels we're going to use. But then it's essential that you actually learn from what's happening when you're sending out messages, i.e. capturing things like delivery receipts and understand if an email's got a hard or soft bounce, or if it's not responded to within a certain time parameter, then it's enabling the campaign to switch seamlessly and cascade to an alternate channel without restarting again. So it is that multi-layered campaign. It might be more rigid, as say, where the data isn't held around customers' preferable channel, but it's absolutely essential that once if you're doing that you're understanding from the responses actually how people like to be contacted. And it's about having an ever-evolving data strategy and the ability to work on the ways people are engaging.
So it's almost like it's the test and learn, and using the data then to test, learn, refine, I suppose, maybe is the best way to put it.
Yeah, it is.
The voice message or the voice note is quite interesting. I think that's quite an interesting dynamic in terms of, if you think about it, I like to read things because I find it very easy, and it doesn't take me a long time. It's very quick to read a message, so you can read quite quick. Whereas listening to the note takes quite a long time. But if I flip it around the other way, I quite like sending voice notes because they're very quick to do. There's almost like an asynchronous sort of time investment there, isn't there, as well? So it's almost like, and that might need to take that into consideration if you're a company. So you might want to still send text notes, even though they might want to send you voice notes back, if you see what I mean. There might be a different sort of channel. It's not always the same channel preference that goes one way or the other.
Exactly. There doesn't have to be a like for like outbound and inbound contact strategy. Again, it goes back to this data and understanding in the, an individual might prefer a text message out, but then their preference might be, as you say, sending a voice message back in. It's not really, it's trying really to offer that choice and not kind of pigeonhole or route customers down an avenue where you're dictating to them the way in which they have to contact you. Because what that leads to, I think, is just great frustration. And just go thinking about this and going back to the original question about the pandemic. I think in the very early days of the pandemic, there was an acceptance from a consumer that actually, you know what, there's a lot of organisations facing a lot of challenge. We know they've got unprecedented demand. We'll give them a little bit of leeway. But I think there's still organisations out there who are still playing on this. What's a pandemic? We've got massive numbers, the expectation, but consumers just won't put up with that anymore. It's not acceptable. It's nearly 2 years. It's not new. It's the way things are now. I mean, from a personal perspective, I think I'd originally planned to travel to Toronto to Boston, and Boston back home in summer 2020. Had to cancel it because of the pandemic. I had 3 different flights booked with 3 different airlines for me and the family. 2 of them handled the refund process very well. One was a lot slower than the other, but it was still a good and fair operation. Norwegian Airlines refunded almost immediately. They were brilliant the way they dealt. I've got one remaining, WestJet, who it took 12 months before I could get my refund turned to a voucher, at which point I had to wait 6 months then to be offered a cash refund, because my voucher was going to run out before I'd ever be likely to be able to use it anyway. So even at the point I've been offered a refund, which was at the start of November, I have to call through to the contact centre because it's the only channel they can process the refund, because the card I booked it on has now expired and I've got a new one. I've called about 5 times and I've waited from 45 minutes to 2 hours, never got through. I've requested a call back, which never came. I've tried to contact on 2 or 3 different channels, web chat, WhatsApp, and I've just been told, well, we can't service your inquiry. So for me, never ever fly with them again purely for that. So for me, the big message there is, there was an acceptance, and I think consumers were more patient at the start. But now, you have to move with the times. You have to offer an operation that, is offering your customers a good service via the right channel, and ensure you're not using it as an excuse, like nearly 2 years on.
Whenever I phone up a call center, when almost like without fail now, we usually have, we're experiencing unusually high volume at this time. It doesn't matter what time I call, whatever day I called, it always seems to be like that. So it just seems like there's and I'd only ever called if I need that high value sort of, I've run out of options online, right? So it's sort of like it feels like something's like needs adjusting a little bit. It really does.
I think so. I think consumers accept the fact that if it is busy and it's a genuine message that triggers in after there's a queue, I don't know, it's very easy to do things like if there's a queue of more than 20 people or X percentage of time to then trigger a message, say we're experiencing difficulties, but don't set that expectation at the start when it may not be busy, because I think you'll just lead to consumer frustration and disharm people.
You just wonder if they're busy or if it's just under capacity. And lack of technologies, I suppose, taking the volume elsewhere.
Exactly, and I think that is one of the big things. It's you have to move with the times, and the times are the continuation of the pandemic. Yes, it's not as unprecedented contact, but the reality is consumer expectation off the back of the pandemic has changed. There's patience initially. Then there's a lot of organisations who really pivoted and really invested heavily on how they dealt with contact and the range of contact channels that are available. And now it's the expectation that organisations can offer more channels, more ways to contact, more personalisation, more automation. You can't suddenly go back to it or play a message that might be a message that you played 2 or 3 years ago in the event of being busy or being under-resourced. So it's important we move with the time.
One last question on large campaigns. We just talked a bit about outbound. I suppose controls is one of the things that comes up. So how many times do you end up sort of typing something up? I mean, I seem to have had problems since coming back from Christmas in terms of like spelling. I type something up, you press send, and you think, oh, I shouldn't have sent it. What about controls and some of those things? So particularly when you get to like really large volumes, I mean, you're talking like 6, even 7-figure kind of sums in terms of messaging that goes out. What's the control kind of environment and importance that you kind of see placed around that?
I think the controls go across a number of different kind of layers. From a system level, something we've got, there's really extensive controls around roles and permissions of individuals, and then the hierarchy of individuals and like sub accounts and what people can do, see, view, and send in terms of campaigns. So one thing we find that's essential, and this is born from sending campaigns, particularly out in LATAM, for some of the mobile network operators in the tens of millions at times. It's essential that you've got a whole process as to how a campaign gets signed off, from creation to then it goes to another sign-off level. So it's being reviewed and checked. Then it might be a third person then that actually sends a campaign and then reviews it for a third time, because the cost of a mistake at that level is the cost for actually sending the message, and the cost of the potential kind of brand damage or reputation if that message isn't on point, and the impact of the on the success of a particular campaign. It's just it's too expensive a mistake to happen. So those controls are really key. I would say the other thing from a control perspective, something that's very important, is that pretty much all technology providers have the ability to blacklist messaging and contact and enable and allowing people to opt out, which from a data protection GDPR perspective, it's a regulatory requirement, so that's a given. But I think in terms of taking it to a different level, it's around having message policies and controls in place as well. We can offer on our platform is the ability to label different message types. So you might have a service message or an essential operational message that you want a consumer to get. It could be around a delivery, could be around a product recall, where you want to have a restriction because you can't send someone a message because they've hit a maximum number of messages within a month. So what you might have is an unlimited for a service or operational message in terms of the number that can go across channels. But then for a marketing or promotional message, it might be that you set a maximum of 1 or 2 a month across channels. So just having that it's another level and layer to ensure that, one, that you're not bombarded your customers with too many messages. Clearly then there's the fact of impact. If you're sending too much and people aren't engaging, then it's not having the necessary impact anyway. And what you're probably going to do is drive someone to opt out sooner if they perceive that actually it's not really personalized or relevant what's being sent. It's just a number of messages, because that's when messages come out from an organization.
I mean, what are your tips around how do you drive engagement? What's the best way to sort of get people to respond to a message or a voice call or whatever it is? I mean, there's time of day, there's message, there's those kind of things. But what's your kind of thoughts on that?
I know at the start you said don't want to talk about the pandemic anymore. You don't want to think about it. But
I'm struggling.
I know. We are struggling because it has changed the dynamic. I think one of the biggest things that is there's a lot more people working at home, whereas previously, people might have been in offices where they couldn't have their mobile on. They might not have had access to their personal email apart from lunch times or after work or of an evening if they were doing shift work. So I think campaigns, probably certainly timed ones, used to be timed more around maybe just before lunchtime, during lunchtime, or of an evening, because you were likely to get people to look at the message irrespective of channel much quicker. I think with people being at home, most people have got their personal mobiles in or near them, unless they're in an environment that means that they're not allowed to do it from a regulatory perspective. But I think the access to people is broader in terms of over the whole day more often than not, rather than looking at lunchtime of an evening. I think the time of campaigns is still very important, and the personalization around the most effective channel that people are engaging with, I think none of that goes away. I just think you've probably got more time to engage with people, because they're not as restricted in terms of what they can look at when.
If you know that someone's going to call and it's important to you, you're going to pick up the phone, right? So if you're waiting for a call, you're waiting for it versus a random call that's coming through. And it's probably the same with SMSs as well. It's like, what's the reason and personalization? I would have thought.
Yeah, it is. There's still great importance of the messaging and trying to drive action or a call to action. And it's also, again, goes back to the fact that part of that personalization is, understanding the channel consumers want to be engaged with, then offering a call to action that isn't just around suiting you and your organization's requirements and needs. I mean, realistically, there's going to be times where you need to try and schedule around available times and resourcing. It's going to be busier within an inbound contact center. So you need to be realistic in working within the confines as to how you're going to be able to service or support a customer. But then on the flip side, what I would say is don't try and too distinctly drive them down an absolute certain time that you need to speak to them, which might not be convenient for them. And it may mean that by doing that, they're not able to either take your call or contact you at that certain time, and then they go dark and you lose that open communication channel. The other thing there as well for me is it's actually looking at and assessing what you're looking to achieve. Again, because of the pandemic, financial hardship and some of the challenges and the level of vulnerable customers certainly seems to have increased a lot. That's what we found from a lot of the organizations we work with. That bracket of customers who would sit within that kind of profile or title is much more extensive than it might have been. So it's actually looking at what you're looking to achieve. Are you looking to recoup an outstanding payment in full that a consumer has, or actually are you ideally looking to do that, but on the flip side offering alternate options which might suit their financial situation at this time? Or actually, the final layer is, well, we know they're probably not going to be able to pay in full. They might be able to pay something, but we're not certain. But more than anything, we want to ensure that we've got an open communication or dialogue with them, so the consumer knows we're here to work with them and support their current situation. Yes, ultimately, we want to recoup the money that's owed, but we want to do it in an ethical way that we're working with them to achieve that. I think that will engender much more consumer loyalty if organisations are working with them in terms of offering choice and channels from a contact strategy, but then options in terms of what happens once they are engaged with someone or speaking with them in a certain way, irrespective of channel.
What's your view in terms of this year, how the market's evolving, and where do you think we'll get to? There's huge amounts that happened on digital, number of channels, proliferation of channels, but what do you think are going to be the big themes this year?
I think the evolution of personalization. I know there's a buzz phrase out there these days called hyper personalization, which in essence is use of data to deliver more personal and tailored products, services and information. Basically, and it enables businesses can use omni-channel data to create customer journeys in real time. I think it's going to become a lot more prominent in the next 12 months. And that is the connection of the channels, the removing of silos, and orchestrating both data and the customer journey in real time. I think there's an expectation from the consumer that should be available. I think there's much more of an acceptance for organizations that that's some of the next stages of digital. If they're not already doing it, then it's essential that they do get on that roadmap in the not too distant future. I think 2022 will definitely see an explosion of hyper personalization.
It's really all about the customer, isn't it? I mean, and it really is about the customer. At the end of the day, as much as I might want something to happen, I've got goals. It's about the customer, because if I make it about the customer, that's how I get them to engage, right? Because it's about them, not about me. It's about them, sort of thing. And it's like, when you call them, when you visit them, what you actually say to them, those kind of things. That's what you were sort of sparking off in my mind, thinking about is the thinking has to be about them rather than what you actually want to a certain extent.
Exactly. No, I couldn't put it any better myself. It is all about them, and it's, I think from the organisation side, it's about having the channels, the offering to enable consumers to basically have that choice. I think just in terms of how they'll value you as an organisation if you're doing that and supporting them in that way, and the loyalty that will end up bringing to organisations. And the loyalty, not just short term, the loyalty, way beyond when the pandemic finally goes away and we don't have to continue talking about it. I think, the way consumers are treated during, the hardest times are the things that will probably have the most long-standing effect on how loyal they are to organisations that have them in their times of greatest need.
Simon, thanks very much for spending the time with me. I really appreciate it. It's been fascinating. There's some really interesting topics there. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Chris. No, it's been my pleasure too. So I appreciate your time.